Hello and welcome to the next YouTube video on my channel. I'm Roman, and in this video I will show and explain you the very interesting EVANS gambit. Beginning with the Italian game, so pawns to e4 and e5, knight to f3 attacking black's pawn on e5, knight to c6 defending the pawn, developing the bishop on c4, black plays a similar move with bishop to c5, and now we already play the key, or also called the main move of the EVANS gambit, pawn to b4, gifting this pawn to our opponent's bishop. So white offers to gift his opponent this pawn already at the fourth move, with the idea to gain positional advantage in the center of the chessboard. Black has to decide now whether he should accept the gambit by taking out our pawn here on b4 with the bishop. Because if he does this, we start launching an attack and striking at the center of the chessboard. We do this with pawn to c3 followed by pawn to d4, completely striking at the center of the chessboard. The other option for our opponent in this position is to decline the EVANS gambit by escaping with the king's bishop now from this attack by moving on b6. And this option, or this variation, leads into many different continuation variations and sidelines. But at first, I would like to show you quickly a very sneaky trap in the EVANS gambit, with which you can completely destroy your opponent in the EVANS gambit in only 14 moves from now. But before I will show you this very cool trap, I would like to ask you to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you won't miss anything new on my YouTube channel, and so that I will be able to produce more videos for you about chess and to increase the quality of them. Thank you. So in the trap, our opponent has to accept the EVANS gambit, so take out our pawn here on b4 with the bishop. And how I've already said, we continue now with pawn to c3, the bishop escapes on a5, and now we do the short castling here. Our opponent continues with a very natural developing move, knight to f6, but we don't defend our now attack pawn on e4, but we rather start an already announced move, so a counterattack at the center of the chessboard with pawn to d4. Here our opponent captures our d-pawn with his e-pawn, and we play bishop to a3, basically forcing our opponent to move his d-pawn one square down because of this very dangerous and important diagonal. So he plays this move on which we attack this pawn, or sacrifice this pawn, by playing e5. Here our opponent captures this pawn, and now this, how I've already said, very dangerous diagonal is open for attacks from us. And therefore we play the very strong move queen to b3, preparing a very bad surprise for our opponent. Here in this trap, our opponent is basically forced to play queen to d7 to defend the now twice attacked and very dangerous pawn on f7, also with the second chess piece. Rook to e1 attacking, queen to f5 defending. And now you definitely shouldn't take the now undefended pawn here on f7 with the bishop, but you should rather play the very strong move bishop to b5, pinning our opponent's knight here on c6. Our opponent plays knight to d7, unpinning the knight, queen to d5, and if our opponent does a mistake and captures now our opponent here our pawn here on c3 with the bishop, also attacking our rook in the corner of the chessboard, we obviously have to capture back the bishop. With our second knight from b1, our opponent captures our knight 2 with his pawn, and now he's already won again one more pawn, so he's 4 pawns up now. But now we capture our opponent's pawn here on e5 with our knight from f3. In this position, our opponent decides to block the now prepared discovered check with the rook and the knight here, therefore he plays knight to e7. We still capture our opponent's knight here on d7, sacrificing our queen, because now our opponent's queen on f5 can just capture our queen on d5 without any problems. But really without any problems, because now we play the crazy move knight to f6, discovered check again with the bishop from b5, the king, if he escapes on d8, gets a checkmate with bishop captures knight on e7 with 3 light chess pieces, but if the king escapes from e8, not on d8 but rather on f8, then it's just the same thing, checkmate with bishop to e7 with only 2 light chess pieces. So you could see now that basically already after 5 or 6 moves before the trap ended with a forced checkmate, White was just playing cat and mouse with his opponent's chess pieces, already being in a definitely winning position, but being 4 pawns down. That's really crazy. And now I will show and explain you the main lines of the Evans Gambit after the first key moves. So the first main option in this position is, how I've already said, to accept the Evans Gambit by capturing our pawn here on b4 now, which was just completely gifted. And now White got into a positional and developing advantage, but is a pawn down. Here we continue with pawn to c3, on which the bishop can either escape on c5 or on a5. But I would say that escaping on a5 is definitely more popular, because if the bishop escapes on c5, he gets into an attack again after pawn to d4, which we also play now. And here it is possible, theoretically, to accept this pawn trade, but it's definitely more popular and famous in the world of chess to decline it by playing pawn to d6 in this position. The other main variation, instead of accepting the Evans Gambit, is to decline it by escaping with the bishop from the pawn's attack on b6, still controlling this very important diagonal which connects the black king bishop with the very dangerous f2 square. Here there are really lots of different moves that we can play. For example, just natural and boring developing moves like the short castling, pawn to c3, knight to c3, and so on. And on all of these moves, black would just continue with also natural developing moves, knight to f6, and so on. But if you're tired of these boring moves, which are all the same every single game, and you want to play something more aggressive, then I have something very interesting for you. In this position, after your opponent has declined the Evans Gambit by escaping with the bishop on b6, we don't play any of these developing moves like knight to c3 or pawn to c3, but we rather start completely attacking our opponent on the queen side of the chessboard by playing pawn to a4, preparing pawn to a5 on the next move, trapping our opponent's bishop on b6. Therefore, our opponent is forced to move his a-pawn to create this a7 escape square for the bishop. And here the pawn can either move on a6 or also directly on a5. But I would be a bit careful here and rather play pawn to a6, because if we play pawn to a5, black has to deal with the very annoying pawn on b5, which also attacks the c6 knight here. It's also interesting, the c6 knight could also not escape on an e7 square pretty passively, but he could also escape on d4, also attacking here us on the center of the chessboard. Here we could accept this trade now, and then continue with moves like pawn to c3. So you could see that this variation is also pretty strong, because we got a pretty nice presence here on the queen side of the chessboard, and we could develop now there. And yes, our opponent has to deal now with all of these advanced pawns here. And this was it already with this video, in which I have shown you the 2 different main continuation variations of the Evans Gambit, accepting it or declining it, and this very nice trap, which I would hope you to try out once in a real chess game, for example against one of your friends who plays chess, or against one of your family members. So, if you like this video, feel free to leave a like, then subscribe to my YouTube channel. Till next time, bye!